Welcome to Spirits of Whiskey. We explore the wide world of whiskey through the many colorful personalities who make it, promote it, write about it, and more.
With each podcast, Kerry Moynahan, a certified bourbon steward and bartender, and yours truly, Philip Dobard, director of the cocktail collection, interview whiskey's most important names.
From high-profile makers, blenders, and ambassadors,
to out-of-the-way innovators and remote pioneers.
Join us as we discover the people and elements that give the water of life its spirit. It is January 15th, 2021, and you're listening to episode 29. Today we speak with Jacob Call and Terry Lozoff about creating Wheel Horse Whiskey.
But first, stay tuned for this week's Whiskey Chronicles.
Have you heard about Anchor? It's the easiest way to make a podcast. Let me explain. It's free. There's creation tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or your computer. Anchor will distribute your podcast for you, so it can be heard on Spotify, Apple Podcast, and many more. You can make money from your podcast with no minimum listenership. It's everything you need to make a podcast in one place. Download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started.
With whiskey's resurgence, it's no surprise that many old brands have been or are being resurrected. Chicken Cock whiskey, for instance, which we discussed with Greg Snyder in episode 14, is one of many revived whiskey labels. Other historic labels that have seen new life breathed into them include Bond and Lillard, Cream of Kentucky, Old Fashioned Cooper, The President's Choice, Kentucky Peerless, Kentucky Owl, and quite a few more. But it is not just pre-prohibition labels that are being re-entered into the market. Boarded up and even dilapidated distilleries are being reclaimed and returned to production as well. Examples include Castle and Key, formerly Old Taylor, James E. Pepper, T.W. Samuels, and Green River.
In 2014, Will Arvin and Wes Murray bought the Old Taylor property, now Castle and Key, for just under $1 million. Restoring the distillery built in 1887 by Colonel Edmund Hayes Taylor has proven a far bigger project than the two expected. Since 1972, when whiskey production ceased, the grounds had been largely neglected. With hard work and perseverance, however, Arvin and Murray have accomplished what many thought impossible.
Built in 1879 and closed and abandoned in 1958, the James E. Pepper Distillery's only use has been as a haunted house. Happily, in 2013, developers unveiled a plan to remake it as an entertainment center. Today, visitors will encounter a brewery, an ice creamery, a microdistillery, as well as the historic James E. Pepper Distillery.
10 minutes outside Bardstown, Kentucky, a new bourbon tourism stop is set to debut at the long-shuttered T.W. Samuels Distillery. Now called the Old Samuels Distillery, the visitor experience will feature tours, shopping, and overnight lodging in on-site cottages.
In 1885, J.W. McCulloch began making whiskey in Owensboro, Kentucky, under the name Green River Distilling Company. In 1819, unfortunately, just 2 years before Prohibition, the distillery was struck by a devastating fire, a blow that proved fatal.
While the property sat, changing hands several times over the next 100 years, nothing of note happened there. Until 2014, when Terrasentia Corporation purchased the distillery, began renovations, and launched operations under the name O.Z. Tyler. In 2016, the distillery opened for production, and Jacob Call joined the team as Master Distiller. Shortly after the distillery's rebirth, Latitude Beverage Co, an independent bottler, partnered with it on a new rye whiskey and a subsequent bourbon whiskey called Wheel Horse.
Finally, in 2020, with the support of J.W. McCulloch's great-grandson, the O.Z. Tyler Distillery reverted to its original name, Green River Distilling Company. For links to more information on the whiskeys and distilleries we touched on in this segment, please visit our website for this episode's show notes. Up next, we speak with Master Distiller Jacob Call and Latitude Beverage Company Spirits Director Terry Lozoff about their collaboration on Wheel Horse Whiskey. Stay with us.
Hey, do you like whiskey, food, and adventure?
I do. Hi, I'm Kerry.
I'm Philip.
I'm Louise. I'm the chef.
Chef Louise Leonard, as in our World of Wheezy segment host here on the podcast. And Whiskey, a Chef's Journey. That chef.
That's right, the project that started this very podcast. The series stars our very own chef, Louise Leonard, winner of Emmy-winning The Taste on ABC.
And explores and connects the worlds of whiskey and food, city by city, country by country.
Would you like to see this spirited culinary adventure on a TV near you?
Well, you can by helping us finish the pilot episode through our crowdfunding campaign.
For more information, including behind-the-scenes photos, videos, and incentives,
And to make a pledge,
visit our website, whiskyachefsjourney.com.
or search for our campaign, Whiskey A Chef's Journey, at GoFundMe.com. That's GoFundMe.com now.
Well, I think it's a cheers to that.
Let's. Cheers. Welcome to this episode of Spirits of Whiskey. Today we are on a bona fide cross-continental call with Mr. Jacob Call, Master Distiller at Green River Distilling Company in Owensboro, Kentucky, and Mr. Terry Lozoff, VP Marketing and Spirits Director at Latitude Beverage in Boston. Welcome, gentlemen.
Hello. Thanks for having us.
Hello.
It's good to have you with us.
Yes, thanks for being here.
Absolutely.
Welcome, guys. It's so great to have you. This is kind of a first for us. We haven't had the Master Distiller and the bottling company match up, so this is very exciting for us.
Mm-hmm.
As we always start out with the show, we talk about our whiskey journeys. So I'm going to go, Terry, since you got on the line first, we'll start with you.
Sure. Well, my whiskey journey was definitely going to be very different than Jacob's, so this should be good.
Yeah. So when you were a young little lad, did you see yourself having this company as an adult, or what was your career choice when you were a kid, and how did you end up where you are?
Yeah, well, I don't know if I can go back to when I was a kid. I can't even remember what I had for breakfast yesterday. But
Sure. Where'd you grow up? Tell us where you grew up.
I grew up in California, actually.
Oh, really? Where?
I grew up in the Bay Area, south of San Francisco,
Okay.
and went to school, college in Colorado, in Boulder, Colorado, and became a big craft beer fan in the late 90s as the craft beer world was starting to come into itself. And then I got into the marketing and advertising agency business for about 15 years, where I worked a lot in the beer world, both with macro breweries and craft breweries. And it was really exciting to kind of see how the beer industry evolved over those years. But during that time, I just became hugely passionate about the entire world of beer, wine, and spirits, and became a big-time whiskey geek. And I started a blog, a drink blog, Drink Insider, in 2010, so about 10 years ago, just to, talk about my passions. And that kind of, snowballed and turned into something I was doing a lot of, and drank a lot of great whiskeys. Yeah.
Drink Insider.
Yeah. Before all the podcasts came out. And it was
You were a pioneer.
Yeah. It was the early part of the whiskey blogosphere.
Nice.
Yeah. So I got a chance to taste a ton of whiskey that was just sent to me over the years, and just became a big whiskey guy. And when I moved over to Latitude Beverage 5 years ago, I was given an opportunity to start our spirits division. And 2 years ago, I was given the opportunity to do whatever the hell I wanted. And I said, you know what? I think it's time that we do a Kentucky rye. And that's kind of how the idea of Wheel Horse came about. And that was kind of completed my journey full circle into something I was hugely passionate about, to something I wanted to do, that I could actually do.
Very cool. Jacob, what about you? When you were a wee little lad, what was your aspirations for a career?
Yeah, well, I kind of grew up in the business. I'm a third generation distiller from Bardstown, Kentucky. My grandfather worked at Jim Beam. My dad worked at Jim Beam. And we moved to Florida. My dad took a job with Florida Distillers and in the 90s, and he created all the Cruzan rum products while he was there. And ended up going to work for my dad. Was a banker for a while before that. And, whiskey and bourbon is a lot more fun than banking. So
yes, that's for sure.
Got in the family business and ran a couple of distilleries there with my dad. And that company ended up getting sold. Being from Kentucky, I always wanted to get to come back to Kentucky to get to make bourbon. And we found the company that I joined at the time was Terrascension. They had found an old rundown shuttered distillery in Owensboro, and it had been vacant for about 25 years. It turns out it was the original Green River Distillery, started in 1885.
Oh, wow.
And it was the Medley Distillery is the name that most people knew it by. And shut down for 25 years. And it was kind of a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for me to, get to come back. And I was really just hired to rebuild this historic distillery. DSP KY10, 10th oldest distillery in Kentucky. So,
yeah, I have a bottle of Medley Brothers bourbon.
Yep.
Wow.
That's
I don't.
Charles Medley's stuff.
Indeed.
So where did the name Wheel Horse come from?
Well, the idea behind Wheel Horse that I had as, a passionate whiskey guy was that I really wanted kind of a new go-to everyday rye and then bourbon. And it's very hard to create names these days. I don't know if you've tried, but
we have.
But we stumbled upon the name Wheel Horse and it stuck because it has a kind of a real working man ethic to it. Historically speaking, the wheel horse was the horse that was closest to the carriage that did most of the work.
Right.
And it was also known as an individual who did a lot of work and never asked for any praise for that work. So we kind of connected with this idea of this kind of working whiskey that you could drink neat, you could put it on the rocks. You could put it in a cocktail, and it's a great price point. $30 that you can drink every day if you want.
It is very accessible. Yes.
Yes.
On the pocketbook, it's not hard. It's easy on the pocketbook. These price points are amazing.
Yeah. Yeah, especially for the quality. And we can get into that later. But what, Jacob and team are doing at Green River is really impressive, and how they've brought this historic distillery back to life. And I feel really lucky that we found Jacob and them when we did, because now I feel like, Wheel Horse is part of this historic story that's now unfolding in its new generation.
Mm-hmm. Now, Jacob, you literally grew up playing on your grandfather's shop floor, correct?
Well, I did. Yeah. He had a farm. Yeah. He had a farm also in Bardstown. So,
okay.
I used to definitely hang out with my dad and my grandfather. And I told somebody the other day, growing up in this business is a little bit kind of like farming. It's a lot of these tricks of the trade. They're kind of passed down from generation to generation. And it was always interesting to run ideas and bounce ideas off of.
Sure. There's a lot of intergenerational wisdom involved in spirits making.
Yeah, absolutely. For sure.
Yeah.
All right. Well, so let's talk about the price point. How are you able to make it so low?
Well, I think my company, our whole kind of vision with spirits brands and wine brands is to find great producers that we can work with, like Owensboro Distilling and Green River, and bring those products to market as best a price as we can. So it's just what our goal was, and we were able to do it, working with the team at Green River. So if you didn't know the price point of these whiskeys and you tried them blind, I think you'd immediately think they were more than that. And especially just knowing the history of this distillery and how they're making, whiskey. These are sour mash whiskeys. They're all made the real way, the hard way. They're aged in, Jacob, you can kind of speak to all of the stuff that you guys do to make these great whiskeys. But I love the fact that they're aged in rick houses that have been on the property for decades and decades, 50 to 70 years, and get in the Kentucky winters and summers. And, they're just terrific, whiskeys.
Yeah. I'm glad you kind of mentioned that the Wheel Horse is made the hard way, because, we don't take any shortcuts here. One thing that we did is, it might cost a little bit more to make bourbon and rye the way that we do. We use high quality ingredients. We buy only local Kentucky corn direct from the farmer here in Kentucky. But, we're also big enough. We're actually the fourth largest independent bourbon distillery in the world. So we're big enough that we've got enough scale to be able to compete with a lot of these other major distilleries. But
you do a lot of private label distilling, correct?
We do.
So you produce a great deal of product for other brands, or that is sold under other brands.
We do. And, it's been great to work with somebody like Terry, with Latitude and Wheel Horse. This was really one of our first big releases of a brand for a private brand customer that we've done out of our facility. So it's been a great relationship so far. And we're just excited to continue to see the brands get to grow.
Yeah.
So how did you two meet and decide to collaborate on this project?
Well, I was sourcing in whiskey is an independent bottling is obviously not something that's new. It's been going on in the Scotch industry for a long time, and it's becoming more common in American whiskey as well. So, we don't have the resources nor the distillery to make our own whiskeys. So that wasn't an option for us. And, I looked around and tasted a number of different whiskey samples when I was first looking into a possible partner for Wheel Horse. And, there are some common avenues that a lot of whiskey brands go to and have gone to in the past 10 years. I'll name one is MGP out of Indiana. You see, especially for rye, which is what we first wanted to do as a rye whiskey. So obviously I tried their stuff, but I wanted something that was new, that was unique, that was authentic, that was ideally Kentucky. And just, I think by luck, I was introduced to the folks at Green River and tried their whiskeys. And I actually think they were a little surprised because I think, Jacob, you guys are making probably 98% bourbon and a very small percentage of rye.
Well, we were at the time. We've certainly increased our rye production. Really, based a lot on conversations with you. We've doing just a lot of high marks on our rye and a lot of positive feedback. So, we've actually increased some of our rye production, really because of Wheel Horse.
Yeah, so I think maybe they were scratching their heads when I came asking a Kentucky bourbon distillery if I could taste their rye. But man, I tasted it and I loved it. And it's just, So I got lucky.
Normally, the way this has been working of late with brands is the bourbon comes first, then comes the rye.
Yes.
You reversed that.
I did. And there was a few reasons I went with rye first. First of all, I'm a huge rye drinker. I love rye and I wanted to do a rye.
No arguments here.
No, I like rye.
But the second reason is the rye shelf is, way less crowded than the bourbon shelf. And I felt like there was a real opportunity from a rye drinker's perspective for a really terrific $30 rye on the market. I mean, there's a couple of them and there's been a few more introduced in the last year or two, like Old Forester put one out, but there's not a ton of really good ryes at this price point. So I felt like it was the way to get going and create a name for Wheel Horse. And we've got a lot of great, as Jacob said, a lot of awards and recognition for the rye over the past year. We only launched this a year ago. And then the obvious follow-up was the bourbon. We were always going to do a bourbon, but we wanted to come in with that second.
Sure. Word about transparency. I'd like to look back at that subject for just a moment. Over the course of this podcast, our many episodes, we have talked with a number of makers, a number of bottlers, and transparency is the key word. You say in Scotland, this has been a tradition for centuries. But in Scotland, there's long been transparency. You know who's bottling what. In the US, there's long been independent bottling as well.
Yes.
But transparency has only recently come to be expected.
There were a number of things I wanted to do when I launched Wheel Horse. One was I wanted to launch a higher proof product. Two, I wanted to launch a product that was non-chill filtered. So between high proof and non-chill filtered, we could really bring a full flavored product to market. But three is that I wanted to be completely transparent about who we were getting our whiskey from and sourcing it from, and maybe even go further than that and create a partnership with them, which is what we did. They have a stake in Wheel Horse, because I was around and I was heavily into the whiskey scene, when things started backfiring on folks like Whistle Pig and
Templeton, for sure.
Templeton. Yeah, it kind of started around then, and people were like, wait a second, what's going on here? And I think now, whiskey drinkers want to know, where is their whiskey coming from? And we have nothing to hide. We're proud of the fact that we are, working with Jacob and team to make Wheel Horse. And it is a collaborative process, which is something I really enjoy. Obviously they're making the whiskey, but I've worked with Jacob closely to do different batches and get to profiles and age ranges that we feel like really kind of hit the profile we're going for these whiskeys. So I am all about transparency and making sure everything is on the table.
So do you guys plan to have another expression come out, or just the two?
Wheel Horse Bourbon and Wheel Horse Rye, 101 proof on both of them. Those are our flagships. That's what we want to grow in the coming years. But Green River is young. Jacob, you guys started putting down barrels in 2016, right? So the oldest whiskeys they have are like 4 years-ish, which means that there is so much opportunity in the years to come as we continue working with them on Wheel Horse to age further and, maybe do like a 4 or 5 year age statement whiskey down the road, or maybe experiment with some cask finishes. But I think we'll definitely look to launch a single barrel program.
Nice.
Hopefully end of next year, where we can start showcasing these ryes and bourbons in their natural state at barrel proof for specific stores.
Mm-hmm. They're already pretty hot, although neither drinks like it. They go down very smoothly. Are you maybe looking at some barrel strength releases?
I think we would. I mean, I personally like to drink around 100 proof in that like 95 to 100-ish proof.
Mm-hmm.
And I think with these particular whiskeys, the 101 is really easy. Like you can sip this neat, no problem, but it can also stand up to, ice cube. I think for our standard releases, I like that proof point because you don't have to water it down or put an ice cube in it, but you can. I think for the single barrel releases or maybe some age statement releases down the road, we would maybe consider some barrel proof stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, Jacob, correct me if I'm wrong, but typically we would be looking at like 116 to 120 proof range for some of the barrels we work with.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, 116, 118, something like that. And, you guys were talking about that price point. At 101 proof, that's a great value too.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, because they're getting you on the taxes as well.
Absolutely.
So the fact that you can maintain that price point, and I'll tell you, when these arrived a week to 2 weeks ago, I tasted both right away, and I didn't know the price point. We hadn't done the research yet.
Right.
And when I saw the price point, amazed is not too strong a word.
Yeah. That seems to be a reaction.
I'm not saying you should ask for more.
Yeah. No.
I'm saying it's a really strong price point.
Yeah. I didn't know the price point until today. And I tasted these the other night because I had to get some samples ready to bring over to Louise. And so every time I crack them open for her, I usually take a little sip. And I was like, ooh, these are really good. And I was like, gosh, I wonder how much these are.
I'd also say that even though these whiskeys they're a little bit young in comparison to some older whiskeys that are out there on the market, but you don't taste that youth in these whiskeys at all. And they're mostly blends of, I would say, 2.5 up to almost 4 years old in most cases, depending on the batch. And I'm amazed that you don't really get any of that green youthfulness that you can get sometimes out of younger whiskeys. And they just show really well.
Yeah. So, Jacob, how do you experiment with recipes and whatnot? Like, when do you decide,
Well, we've got probably over 20 different recipes that we do.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
We do everything from wheated bourbons to high rye, high corn bourbons. But the mash bill recipe for this particular bourbon is 70% corn, 21 rye, and 9 malted barley. I guess you're okay with releasing that, Terry.
Yeah, absolutely. It's on the bottle.
It's in the press release. So, it's on the bottle. Wow.
Yeah.
Is it?
That's
wow.
So, all about transparency, like Terry was saying. So,
yeah, it's right there.
and that's a little bit high on the rye content side.
Mm-hmm.
Traditionally, some of those heritage type legacy brands would be around 13, 14% rye. So,
Mm-hmm.
a little bit higher on the rye content, which gives a little more flavor, I think. And then the rye whiskey is a 95% rye whiskey. So, it's a
Mm-hmm.
full-bodied rye whiskey. So,
And the 5 is malted?
yeah,
Malted barley?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
That kind of surprised me because I was expecting with the 95% that it would be hotter, especially since it's a 101 proof. It was
Likewise.
yeah. How did you manage that?
When I tasted it, I said, oh, this must be a high corn rye. And then I looked more closely and saw 95.5, and it was like, what Kerry asked. How'd you achieve that?
Yeah, there's a lot of tricks to the trade. We've got a great distillation system, a lot of copper in our system that really contributes to that smooth flavor. We use number 4 char barrels, and we've got some really great rick houses here where we age our barrels. So it's a combination of a lot of things. The yeast strains that we use in our fermentation, we've got a couple different proprietary strains that we use for each product. It's a combination of things.
And you use the sour mash method in both.
We do, yeah.
Can you tell us about your reason for adopting that?
Well, we put a little bit back from each distillation back in our cook. And, it just kind of jump starts the yeast. It gives them a little bit more nutrient, and a little bit of the unfermentable sugars that were left over to kind of kickstart your yeast. So
I always think of sourdough bread every time I hear about that method because that's what they do with the mother dough.
Yeah.
And I think of Solera Sherry. Yeah. I mean, it is its own method, but it has something in common with both of those.
That's right.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I don't know about you all, but all this talk about the whiskeys, I'm ready to taste so we can get back into some more flavor profiles. Which do you guys want?
Where shall we start, gentlemen?
I personally would start with the bourbon first. It's the newest release, and also I think it's a little bit lighter on the palate than the rye. So it's maybe a little easier to go with the bourbon first.
Okay, here we go. All the bottles are popping. All right.
While you guys are pouring your whiskeys, one other interesting thing about the Green River Distillery is its location. It's on the banks of the Ohio River, far west in Kentucky. And if you look at the Kentucky Bourbon Trail, everything is kind of centered around Louisville and Bardstown in that area. And you have to, Jacob, I don't know how long it takes to get from Louisville to Owensboro, but you got to want to go out to Owensboro. It's uniquely out there.
We're about 2 hours from Louisville and that.
Oh, wow.
And we consider ourselves the gateway from the West,
Nice.
a heritage member of the Kentucky Bourbon Trail. So I'm actually on the board of the Kentucky Distillers Association.
Oh, fantastic.
Speaking of legacy, you hold Kentucky Distilling License number 10, correct?
We do, yeah. We're the 10th
Wow.
registered distillery in Kentucky. So
I didn't think you were that old, mister.
Well, he doesn't personally hold.
Jacob drove down to the place to get it in 1890 to get that 10th permit.
Well, this must be they say it's the water of life when they talk about whiskey, right? So this must be the water of long life.
Yeah.
Yeah. Speaking of water, what is your source? Not the Ohio River, I don't imagine.
So we do have some of that famous Kentucky limestone water here.
Mm-hmm.
And we've got our own wells here on site, deep water wells that we use down into that famous Kentucky aquifer. So
Nice. Well, I'm smelling it. And I want to say I get a butterscotch, which I don't normally get in bourbon.
I'm smelling the same thing.
It's delightful.
Yeah. And on the palate, there was a lot of spice. And in fact, again, these two releases are kind of switched, kind of reversed. The bourbon has a lot of spice, and don't want to spoil it for everyone on the rye, but, there's a lot of sweetness in the rye. So,
yeah, what I kind of get from these, I get a little bit of almost maple syrup, pecan, some toasted oak, a little bit of cherries. And it does have some of that spicy characteristics too that you'll find with that higher rye content in the mash bill.
Mm-hmm.
I really like the balance on both of these whiskeys where, Philip, you mentioned with the rye, you get a little more of that sweetness, which is true. We'll get to that. And with the bourbon, you get a little of the rye spice. And I think the spice and sweet combination really balances itself nicely in both of these.
Mm-hmm.
So you get both of those components, which I personally really love.
Yeah, I'm really digging this bourbon. I'm usually more of a rye person, but I think your bourbon can sway me.
Honestly, I think truly, Terry and I are pretty discriminating when it comes to whiskey. And if you had put this in front of me, I can't speak for Kerry, in front of me and said, here's my rye, try my rye, I would not have said this is not a rye.
Yeah.
For what that's worth.
No, I love the rye too. It's a very different rye than I'm used to. And I can think of lots of lovely cocktails to put this in, which we will get to later in the show.
Well, me coming from being a rye lover and launching the Wheel Horse Rye first, I did enjoy the fact that we have a bourbon with a 20+% rye content.
Mm-hmm.
I like high rye bourbon mash bills just because it does keep that spice in there to offset the sweetness.
Right.
And I have to say, I've moved on to the rye. I've not encountered a rye with this oily and this round a mouthfeel. It's brilliant.
Yep. It's very soft.
Yeah, we get a lot of compliments on our rye, and Terry can probably mention some of the awards that it's won, but great reviews for sure.
Hey, Terry, drop some award names.
Well, I think to me, the best feedback I've gotten is just, being involved in what's going on in social media and Instagram with the really active whiskey community. We've just received a ton of great response, especially on the rye. People just loving it. And I think also non-traditional rye drinkers have liked this rye because, like you said, it's a little different. It has a sweetness to it. It has a roundness to it that really makes it very palatable. With a lot of people who don't like rye might not like, the savoriness or the spice or the dryness that some ryes can give you. This has a lot of round and sweeter notes to balance that. It did get a 94 points recently at the New York International Spirits competition. It got a gold medal at the San Francisco Spirits competition.
Great.
So it's doing all right.
Awesome.
Those are good names to drop.
Yeah. One day I'm going to get back to the San Francisco competition and hang out there. I'm from the San Francisco Bay Area, so I always am very interested in seeing what they say, especially since they're kind of a big deal, I guess.
Yeah, they are. That one's definitely a big one.
Yes, they are widely considered the gold standard or the double gold standard of spirits competitions.
Jacob, I wanted to ask you, we were talking, and I think it was before we were on air, a little bit about the distillery's tours, I guess. Do you have tours, or is it just you were able to have the stores open? During non-COVID times, what do you offer for visitors?
Yeah, we are. Unfortunately, our tours are shut down at the moment due to COVID. But when we're open, we do have a gift shop, and we do tours 6 days a week. And we're normally very busy with tours. Like I mentioned, kind of the gateway from the West. So we're normally the first stop or the last stop for people on their tour route. And, Owensboro's the 4th largest city in Kentucky. So, we've got a pretty good downtown area and restaurants. And so we get a lot of overnight guests that come to visit us here at the distillery.
Cool. And how long about is the tour itself?
It's about an hour, planned for about an hour. And it's kind of more of a behind the scenes type tour. You might get dirty, or we may put you to work on the tour.
Nice.
So, you never know what's going to happen.
You may make a wheel horse of someone.
Nice.
While we're on the topic of Owensboro, when I visited Owensboro for the first time about 2 years ago, when I first met these guys, or a year and a half ago even, and I had been to Kentucky several times, had always gone to Louisville, had always gone to Bardstown and, that area. And Owensboro definitely, for people who don't know Kentucky, flies a bit under the radar. And as does this distillery, I think, as Jacob said, it was shut down for almost 3 decades, and which is not uncommon. A lot of distilleries shut down during the 90s and early 2000s because the bourbon industry was not doing too well. But I think it's a place and a distillery that if you're a whiskey fan, you should start to get on your radar, because I think it's an important part of the Kentucky map and history, going back to the 1890s. So I'm really excited to see Owensboro and Green River come back to the light of the whiskey conversation.
Yeah.
Yeah, Owensboro, Davis County, this area had over 20 distilleries. We're a river town, just down from Louisville, and it was Louisville and us, and it's really Owensboro's kind of sat on the sidelines for all these years, and they've been very supportive with having another big distillery back open to be a part of that in Kentucky.
That's very cool.
Yeah, and I love the whole story behind Green River. I mean, it opened in 1885. Who was it? John McCullough or Jim McCullough?
Yeah, John McCullough.
John McCullough.
Yeah.
Founded the distillery in 1885. Again, Kentucky Distilling Permit number 10. There was a fire sometime before Prohibition that destroyed much of the property and improvements thereupon. Reopened, but then Prohibition pushed it right back down again. And you discovered this property. I think it's just, all stories, there's something beautiful about all origin stories, but I think this one stands out.
Yeah, well, thank you for saying that. And, the other thing, we keep talking about the Wheel Horse, name and meaning. And, this place was in ruins when we got here. There was water damage and roof damage. And, we literally rebuilt this place brick by brick. And,
wow.
Yeah, it's 26 acres here. So
That's what I was going to ask that galloped away. How big is the property?
26 acres, multiple warehouses and distillation and bottling. And, it was some big names were done here a long time. Ezra Brooks was done here. Mellow Corn was done.
Right.
I'm just fortunate enough and really honored to got to help bring it back to life. And now I'm just kind of the caretaker for a while.
I saw Mellow Corn. I read about Mellow Corn was distilled there as well, correct?
Oh, was it?
Correct.
Yeah, I love Mellow Corn.
Mellow Corn was one of the first whiskey tastings I ever went to.
Really?
Yeah.
That's an interesting first whiskey tasting.
I was down at 7 Grand in downtown.
Yeah,
I went to
Los Angeles. Yeah.
I love the historic names that have come out of this distillery, like Mellow Corn and Ezra Brooks, because these are names of bourbons that have been part of the bourbon conversation for a really long time, and it just kind of is a testament to the history that was here and that they're bringing back and building on.
Yeah.
You distilled under the O.Z. Tyler name for 4 years before adopting Green River Distilling Company. Can you talk about that a bit?
Sure. So when we opened up, the parent company, as mentioned, was Terrasentia, and the founder of the company, his name was O.Z. Tyler. So really, we just picked his name to name the company after him, sort of as a tribute. He had passed away right before we bought the facility, so it was kind of a tribute just to name it after Ty. His name was Ty. Orville was a Lotus, Ty Tyler III. And we kind of had our eyes on the Green River trademark for a long time, really from the beginning. But, sometimes it takes a while for these deals to work themselves out. It was kind of a no-brainer for us to get to be able to purchase back the original name and trademark of the distillery.
Sure.
We'll launch a brand. We'll launch a Green River label and brand in 2021. So
Okay.
Nice.
there's been a lot of brands that have been resurrected.
Oh, indeed.
But not many get back to the original home where it all started.
Yeah. No, in fact, we have interviewed a number of resurrectors. Yeah.
There's a number of them that have come out of Kentucky as of, the last 5 years. Like, I think you guys talked to Chicken Cock as, another old historic brand. But yeah, it's a different situation because, Green River does have that original building. The original
That is very
distillery.
cool.
Yeah. Again, a beautiful origin story. Shall we talk cocktails?
I think so.
Sounds good to me.
All right. Well, the Center for Culinary Culture is one of the producers of this podcast, and one of its collections is the cocktail collection. So we always make a point of talking cocktails. We never ask, what's your favorite cocktail? Because why limit oneself to a cocktail? Rather, we talk about categories and go-tos. So both of you, whoever wants to start, talk to us about your go-to category.
I'll jump in with a few of mine. Like I said, my original goal was to get a whiskey that was a go-to for both drinking neat and, putting in cocktails. And I love Wheel Horse Rye in, a handful of traditional whiskey cocktails. It's perfect in a rye Manhattan. What I tend to do with really any of those bourbon or rye based cocktails like that have sweet vermouth is I dial the sweet vermouth back a little bit because this rye does have a inherent sweetness to it that I think brings some of that sweetness that the sweet vermouth would. So I love it in a Manhattan. I think it makes a great old fashioned because, again, same thing. You can dial back the sugar component a little bit and let the natural sweetness of the whiskey kind of bring that to the surface.
I was going to say the same thing. Usually I make my Manhattans with rye, but I usually make them as a perfect Manhattan with both the dry and the sweet. But I was thinking with this one, I would leave the sweet out because I think that the sweetness in your rye would be plenty. Also because I tend to switch the Angostura bitters for a cherry spice bitters. So I think I could do it with just the dry vermouth in that recipe. And I'm going to try it and I'll let you know how it is.
Very good. Jacob?
Yeah, I'm pretty traditional. First of all, if I'm going to have bourbon or rye, especially for the first time, it's generally with a couple ice cubes. But when it comes to a cocktail, it's my go-to is a Manhattan or an old fashioned. Those are always what I lean towards. Typically, rye in the Manhattans and bourbon in the old fashioned. That's sort of
Sure.
my go-tos.
Sure. I'm looking forward to trying this rye in a Sazerac.
Ooh, yes, that would be good.
As well as a Boulevardier.
I have done it in a Boulevardier recently, quite a bit actually.
Okay.
The Boulevardier has been my go-to cocktail for the last month, and this
there you go,
featuring Wheel Horse.
Nice.
Yeah. Again, I'm assuming you're not doing equal parts of the three.
I'm not.
You're dialing back the modifiers.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, I personally normally dial back my sweetness modifier anyway, even if I wasn't using Wheel Horse, but I dial it back even further with Wheel Horse.
Okay.
So you just get like a pipetting little straw and just do a little drop instead.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I would like to try this rye in a whiskey flip.
Ooh.
Because I think this emulsified by a whole egg, creating a nog, is just that would be brilliant, I think.
Good for the season, for sure.
Indeed.
Yes.
Yeah, there's that too. Yeah.
Well, fantastic.
Gentlemen,
It has been a pleasure.
an absolute pleasure.
Thank you for having us on.
Oh,
Thank you very much. It's great talking with everyone.
and we look forward to talking to you again as your releases accumulate.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm very excited about Wheel Horse and where it's going, but I'm also excited about Green River and where they're going. And I'd say,
Absolutely.
this is a distillery to keep your eyes on. And I can't wait to see what they're doing with their own Green River brand. So 2021, I guess, right, Jacob?
Yeah, stay tuned. Big things coming.
All right.
To infinity and beyond.
Indeed. Thanks, guys. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
The Center for Culinary Culture, home to the Cocktail Collection and LA Food and Drink Museum, has a YouTube channel featuring a mix of how-to, lively talk, and culinary entertainment. Already streaming are Cocktails, The Grand Tour, Culinary Quickies, Music and Booze with Mo, and this podcast, Spirits of Whiskey. New shows coming soon include Complete Greek, telling the story of Greek food one dish at a time, and Spirits of Rum, a podcast featuring personalities from the wide world of cane spirits. Find us on YouTube, the Center for Culinary Culture, and subscribe now. The Center for Culinary Culture, telling the story of food and drink one taste at a time.
Hey, Louise, it's good to have you on this week. How are you doing?
Doing well. Thanks for having me again. Happy to be here.
Of course, of course. So I just got some samples, which I sent over to you. We got some Wheel Horse Bourbon and Rye, and see what you wanted to pair with one of these beautiful expressions.
Well, this week I went for the Wheel Horse Bourbon.
Okay.
I think it's because we're now in the holiday season, and I feel like our best food offerings here in Los Angeles during this time of year are tamales. And oftentimes I just refer to this time of year, well, the chunk of time between Thanksgiving and New Year, as tamal season. So, so that's been on my mind. And then once I taste this bourbon, because it's, you get so much of the corn flavor out of it, I'm like, why would I not want to drink this bourbon while eating tamales? Because the corn can play off the corn. So, yeah. And also, one of the very traditional type of tamales that I end up purchasing, I make them, but I also, they're sold all over LA. And I think they're just, if you can find the woman at the supermarket who is selling them out of the trunk of her car, that's where you get them, because she has made them at home. They will be the best, and there's a huge difference between the Mexican tamales and then tamales from various Central American nations that don't necessarily use corn, or if they do, they wrap them in banana leaves as opposed to corn husks. So, there's so many different variations, but one of the ones that I really love is the coarse ground corn stuffed into a corn husk and filled with a pork that's cooked in a chile verde. So it's just like a delicious porky, slightly spicy, not crazy, kind of stew that gets stuffed into the masa, wrapped, and then steamed. And so that, because pork and bourbon are so great together as well.
Yes, for sure.
That's as much of a combination as milk and cookies. So
yeah,
I did save some of the whiskey after I tasted it, because I'm like, I'm totally doing this. I have to go out and get some. I do actually have some tamales in my freezer that one of my coworkers made, but I don't have any of the pork and chile verde left. So I'm gonna go out and get some this week so that I can enjoy it that way. I mean, I know it'll be good. So
awesome. Very awesome.
That's my extremely LA pairing to go with this Kentucky bourbon.
Well, that sounds awesome, and I can't wait. I haven't actually tried them yet, so I can't wait to try it live on air with our guest. Then after I do that, I think I'll go and pick up some tamales at your house.
Yeah, well, I mean, I've got a handful of places I go, so you just let me know if you want in, and I'll get you a dozen. I mean, because you kind of need to have enough in your freezer to heat up at any given moment.
Right, of course.
Really, you should have about, I would say, 3 dozen in your freezer, because then you can get different kinds, and it's like, what am I need a snack today. What should I have? I'll have a couple tamales. Pull them out of the fridge or the freezer. You're good to go.
Yeah, and it's a nice hearty meal, but not overly
No, it's like, I mean, I'll eat them. I actually, when they're in the freezer, I sometimes will take them out and then frozen, just in a pan, I'll put just a little bit of olive oil, and then you take them out of the husk and you fry them in the pan. So you kind of brown one side and then you flip it over, and then just put a little bit of water in there and put a lid on so that it steams it and gets the inside warm. And I'll have that with egg. That with like an egg or two for breakfast and a bunch of salt. That's like yum.
And eggs are my favorite. Like I can eat eggs for every meal, like all the time. So
there you go.
I think we'll do that. Cool. And we'll talk to you again soon.
All right.
For show notes on today's podcast, please visit our website at spiritsofwhiskey.com. That's whiskey with an E.
We'll include links and supporting documents from today's Whiskey Chronicles, as well as tasting notes and recommendations from today's World of Wheezy.
As always, you'll see upcoming topics, a guest roster, and links to past shows. Thanks for joining us.
Until next time, Salam.
Slunchava.
You can become a sustaining supporter of Spirits of Whiskey by making a monthly donation. Just visit the Spirits of Whiskey page at anchor.fm. That's anchor.fm/spirits-of-whiskey and click on the support button.
And if you really like us, give us a 5-star rating and a review.
Thank you. Spirits of Whiskey is produced by First Reel Entertainment and the Center for Culinary Culture, home of the Cocktail Collection, and is available via Anchor, Apple, Google, iHeartRadio, Spotify, and wherever fine podcasts are heard.